Well, this nondescript looking building, most government buildings are, is the provincial government building for Maastricht in the Netherlands, where I'm speaking this weekend. And Maastricht has become most famous for something called the Maastricht Treaty. There's a plaque over here to commemorate what has been an absolute disaster for the people of what became the European Union. And this is where the European Union became the EU, because it was here in 1991 that it was agreed to bring in this Maastricht Treaty, which was a massive centralization of power in the European Union. In fact, to transfer the name European Economic Community to what it became here, the European Union, and it was all ratified and went ahead in 1992. And as the ducks have a squabble here, it's quite appropriate given the squabbling that goes on in the now European Union. And the whole story of the EU leads us here, and beyond of course, but it leads us here because, you know, people now in Britain, for instance, are arguing still over whether we should come out of the EU in Brexit after the referendum, or whether we should stay in because it will be terrible. All the political classes and Tony Blair and all the usual suspects are wanting us to stay in the club that so represents their interests. But what they need to get their heads around is the fact that the EU, as it's become, and much further along the road of centralization of power and control that it wants to go into, was all planned from the start. See, after the Second World War, if you'd have offered the people of Europe a centralized dictatorship in Brussels, ruled by dark suit bureaucrats that most people can't even name, then the people would have said, well, hold on a second, they'd have said in Britain and other countries, we've just spent years fighting and dying and sacrificing and being maimed for life to stop the centralization of control in Europe. What are you doing saying, you know, we're going to hand over that control now without a bullet being fired? Go away, don't be stupid. So they're not going to tell us where they want to go. They sell us something that seems okay to a lot of people, a free trade area. So you join the free trade area. Oh no, there's no centralization of power, there's no giving up sovereignty. No, it's just a free trade area, good for jobs, very good for jobs. We now know through, some people knew before, but we now know from British government documents being released that Ted Heath, the paedophile Satanist Prime Minister of Britain, the man who signed us in to what became the European Union in the early 1970s, had as part of that agreement, that negotiation, agreed to run down British manufacturing industry, run down the coal industry, run down the steel industry, and destroy, essentially, the British fishing industry as it was at the time. It was all planned from the start. So now, something that began, it's all documented in my books, way back at least in the 1920s, this was being orchestrated, this European Union as it became in the background. Once it kind of hit the surface with the creation of the common market, just a free trade area, nothing to worry about, then the process started. I was always going to. There are letters that have come to light in which they were saying to each other, what we're going to do is constantly centralize power in the European Union as it became, step by step, and we're going to give an economic excuse for each step. And then eventually, before people realize, they'll be in basically a totalitarian, bureaucratic, controlled state without realizing it, through what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, step by step by step by step, and try to obscure the fact that all these steps are going in the same direction and they're all connected. So more and more we heard, oh, well, what we want is just more centralization of power, because then it will be more efficient and much better and things will happen quicker, and all these excuses. And then we reached Maastricht here, where there was this colossal transfer of power in Europe from sovereign nations to the Brussels bureaucracy. Out of this also came the euro. And so step by step, and of course, as you go step by step towards the centralization of power, you are gathering more and more power at the center with each step, and thus the more power you gather at the center, the more power you then have to centralize even quicker. And this Maastricht Treaty was an enormous step in that direction. Of course, it's been followed by the Lisbon Treaty, which took it even further into a centralized tyranny. So we have something that was planned from the start to be what it is now, and what is planned to become even more of a dictatorship. And this is the reason that when countries have had referendums, like over the proposed European constitution, or whether the referendum in Ireland, etc., and other places, whenever the people have voted not to allow further centralization of power in Europe, which is the agenda, these manipulators have waited a little while, done more manipulation in the background, and then insisted on another referendum, which has given them the result that they want. And note, whenever they get the result that they want, more and more centralization of power, they never have another referendum after that. So, with the proposed European Constitution, some countries voted against it in referendums so comprehensively that these people realized that we can't go back. We probably won't win the second referendum either. So in an extraordinary, barefaced, in-your-face manipulation, they just said, we're gonna replace the European Constitution with a treaty, the Lisbon Treaty. And because it's a treaty and not the Constitution that the referendums that voted against it were voting about, then those referendums are irrelevant, no longer relevant, no longer count. What they didn't tell you is something like 98% of the changes that were in the proposed Constitution that was voted down in those referendums was in the Lisbon Treaty. And politicians across Europe knew that. They knew that they were completely ignoring the will of the people to push this agenda on. This is the political class. Doesn't matter what the party is in government, the same political class is pushing the same agenda. And so we reached the point, this is why they're now trying to stop Brexit happening as best as they can. This political class, because it's a multi-party political class, where the majority in the Labour Party in Parliament and Conservatives and the Greens and Liberal Democrats, all these people, all want to stay in the European Union. They have ignored the wishes of the people. So when people in Britain were voting at an election, they had absolutely no way of voting for a party that was going to listen to them about the way the centralized dictatorship of the EU was transforming their society and imposing its will in fine detail upon their lives. Then along came UKIP and Nigel Farage, which while people may have great disagreements with what they stand for in general, I do in many areas. But what they did, and Farage did brilliantly, because it's Nigel Farage, not really a party. Whenever he walks away, the whole thing seems to go pear-shaped. But what they did was give an ability for people in elections to vote the way they felt about the European Union. And they obviously became more and more successful. And this is where Brexit came about. David Cameron, Prime Minister, Conservative, thought he had to respond to this increasing success of the of UKIP that were anti-European Union, because they were taking votes from the Conservative Party. They were actually taking votes from the Labour Party as well. So to do that, he promised a referendum on staying in the EU if he won the following election. He believed he'd never ever have to offer that. The polls were saying that it would be another coalition government, basically between him, the Conservatives, and the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats, who are EU bureaucracy to their DNA, would never have allowed that referendum to go ahead as part of the deal. But what actually happened is Cameron's Conservative Party won outright, against all the predictions. Now he's stuck with the EU referendum he promised. But nay, still, no problem. What we're going to do is we're going to frighten the great unwashed, the people we have absolute contempt for, by telling them in every manner we can think of that disaster will happen the morning after if you vote to come out of the European Union. Godzilla will attack London. We'll need an emergency budget, and so on. And they thought, job done. But it wasn't, because at last the people had a clear in-out choice with no political party involved, and they took it in an incredible vote. And I said on the morning that referendum result was announced, this is just the start, because this political class is not going to go quietly. And when I talk about political class, I mean that in Britain, which is pressing for Brexit to be stopped, and at the very least fundamentally diluted, and that same political class in Britain is in league with the political class in Europe and the bureaucratic control system in Europe to bring Brexit down. And it is extraordinary to me that the driving force behind this Stop Brexit is what we call the progressive mentality, not the liberal mentality. Forget Liberal Democrats, they're not liberal. Forget liberal progressives, they're not liberal. They don't believe in freedom, they don't believe in democracy, they don't believe in freedom of speech, freedom of expression. What they believe in is freedom for people to agree with them. And because the Brexit referendum went against them, well, now they want to stop it, because only stupid people would vote to come out of the EU, so therefore what they think doesn't matter. No, only stupid people would vote to stay in terms of these progressives, a bureaucratic control system, which is only where it is now, not where it's planned to go. I was writing in my books in the 1990s about the plan was to create a European army, pan-European foreign policy, and taking more and more sovereignty away from nation states, so that they basically were just local councils compared with what's happening at the centre in terms of power and dictatorship. In the last few months, they've been openly talking about creating a European EU army, and people like Macron in France have been making speeches about the need for more and more centralisation of power, basically creating a United States of Europe under centralised control. That is where it was always planned to go from the very, very start. And here we have these people who call themselves, quite wrongly, liberal, and talk about freedom, talk about being the operative phrase, who are pressing for us to stay in a bureaucratic dictatorship that wants to delete all of those things. And so we are now seeing effort after effort to derail, to dismantle, to dilute what the people of Britain have voted for. And we mustn't allow it to happen. You know, This progressive mindset is so bewildered that many of the people who are pressing for us to stay in the European Union are the same people that go on marches and protests about the centralization of power in the world through what is called globalization. Centralization of power gives to the few more and more and more power the more you do it over the greater and greater many. Globalization, which they oppose, and the centralization of power in the European Union are expressions of the same global centralization of power. Wake up and start to see what's happening around you. Life is not random. World events are not random. Politics is not random. It's part of a tapestry of pieces, all connected, to take the human race into a point of centralization of power and control that most people couldn't even imagine. But that's where we're going. And this, in Europe, was a mighty, mighty step on that road, which is still going now and is planned to end with the deletion of freedom in every area of human life.